At a cafe in Melbourne's outer northwest suburb of Keilor, tucked just alongside Tullamarine Airport, two men sip orange juice and coffee on Saturday morning. A man clad all in black with a balaclava over his face leaps from a black Audi and sprays bullets at the two men.
Cold-blooded killing has rocked Melbourne after a major underworld figure was shot at a cafe in Keilor.
Shot dead is notorious criminal and standover man Gavin Preston, nicknamed Capable, apparently because he was said to be capable of anything. He'd recently been released from jail after serving 11 years for shooting a drug trafficker. Running for his life is Preston's table mate, Abbas Maghnie, who saw the gunman approaching and leapt from the table, leaving Preston to die alone. Preston and Maghnie were prominent members of one of the crime families now battling for control of Melbourne's underworld. On one side are the Maghnies, including the late Preston and Abbas Jnr, now recovering in hospital, who is himself the son of a murdered gangster. On the other side are the Maghnies, known as the notorious crime family. And believe it or not, there are two young lovers, a Maghnie and a Maghnie, at the centre of what's shaping up as a new gangland war.
And this wasn't just a random explosion of violence, if you like. This was the most audacious, brazen gangland hit for 20 years.
Damon Johnson is Victorian editor of The Australian and a long-time former editor of Melbourne's heartland paper, The Herald Sun.
So this really does take Melbourne back 2 decades ago to the violence and the bloodshed at the height of the gang war.
The man who survived this shooting, Abbas Jnr, has a sister, Sabrine, who looks like you might expect a Melbourne gangland princess to look, ultra glamorous. She's been in a romance with a senior member of the notorious family, Jason Moran. Jason Moran and Gavin Preston had serious beef. When Preston recently got out of jail, he'd threatened to assault and even rape Jason Moran. Now it's Preston who's dead.
As the Herald Sun has reported this morning, Jess Moran is going out with one of the Maghnie daughters, Sabrine, and this obviously, depending on which version of events you place most reliability in, played a role in the violent offences in Keilor on Saturday. Now, that's not been confirmed by the police. There's a long way to go in this investigation. But clearly, when you have two warring families, you have a romantic crossover, you've got competing business interests, for want of a better description, and then you've got the release of a violent character like Gavin Preston from jail for the first time in a decade, then that is a recipe for what happened. I think the community is just fortunate that there weren't innocents hit by some of those bullets that were sprayed into Preston.
Melbourne's famous for serious gangland warfare. In the late 90s, Carl Williams, Tony Mockbell and the Moran family wrestled for control of the city's amphetamine trade. 36 people were murdered.
Victoria Police are under pressure after a series of shootings and a firebombing in Melbourne's north. Local residents are afraid they're getting caught in the middle of a gangland war. Police say they believe
the violence later became the subject of Channel 9's fictionalised Underbelly series. The fighting finally stopped when Carl Williams was arrested by Victoria Police's Task Force Purana. He was later murdered in prison.
Prison authorities have CCTV footage of the incident and police are questioning another prisoner about the assault. Williams was meant to be under close guard and the puzzle is how anyone got near enough to him to carry out the attack.
That should have been the end of it. But things took a twist when it was revealed criminal barrister Nicola Gobbo, codenamed Lawyer X, continued to represent underworld figures like Williams and Mockbell while informing on them to police. Here she is on the ABC's 7:30.
It began as an ethical and moral dilemma for me that morphed into a dependence upon Victoria Police.
Gobbo's conduct and the decision by Victoria Police to engage her as an informant called convictions secured on her evidence into question and led to some successful bids for freedom. As the editor of the Herald Sun, Damon spent years fighting to identify Gobbo in the state's Supreme Court, and won.
The police, their argument all along was that this was noble corruption, which they mean basically the ends justified the means. Such was the violence on Melbourne streets that the police were willing to do everything to resolve that gang war. And many of them still argue that if that meant breaking the law or breaking the rules by employing Gobbo to spy on her clients, then that was worth it. I think the Royal Commission and many others would say that noble corruption is a misnomer, and you can't have a police force whose job it is to enforce the law, breaking it to try and resolve these issues. I was in a senior editorial role at the Herald Sun, and there were many late nights. Every week seemed to bring another shooting. It was a bloody period in Melbourne's history, one that we hope we're not heading back into, although, given the violence around Preston's execution, perhaps we're already there, but we just don't know it yet.
20 years ago, Tony Mockbell and Carl Williams were household names. The main players in this latest Melbourne gangland drama don't yet have the same notoriety. On one side, there's the Maghnies, once led by patriarch Nabil Maghnie, whose criminal record spanned decades. Nabil survived an attempted hit before he was ultimately murdered in 2020. His children are Abbas Jnr, or AJ, Sabrine and Jacob. AJ was there when his friend and business partner Gavin Preston was killed in Keilor on the weekend.
Gavin Preston is a notorious Melbourne gangland figure. He spent much of the last decade behind bars for very serious violence offences. He's got a long list of convictions. He was also the prime suspect in a number of murders and attempted murders. And word on the street is that he was a dead man walking. And yet there he was on a Saturday morning, sitting out in a Keilor cafe when his number came up.
On the other side are the Maghnies, also known as the notorious crime family. Their leader George is currently serving multiple sentences for murder and drug trafficking.
A Melbourne crime figure has been jailed for 32 years for a cold-blooded execution. He's the same man accused of running a drug syndicate from behind bars.
Jason Moran, you'll recall, is the Romeo in the star-crossed lovers scenario we told you about earlier. And if you thought that was a twist, here's another. Jesse's sister, Meshlyn Moran, another ultra-glamorous gangland lady, died after contracting COVID in 2021. And just last month, her grave was desecrated.
Her coffin was then dragged a significant distance and smashed open. Nothing was stolen.
It's been speculated the thieves were attempting to hold Meshlyn's body for ransom, but couldn't get the coffin out of the tomb. For now, police are digging through all this drama to find out who shot Gavin Preston. There's some speculation Preston was stealing trucks from the Maghnies, who run an earth-moving business.
Like most of these hits in the gang war, it's never just one thing. It seems to be an accumulation of trouble. And when one gang decides that an individual has accumulated too much trouble, they deal with it in their own way. Someone's had to find a couple of $100,000 to take the contract out. And that's obviously cold, hard cash. So someone really wanted Gavin Preston dead, and they were willing to spend big to do it.
One thing police are probably not going to try this time is getting a lawyer to snitch.
I think the era of employing defence lawyers to dob their own clients in, and in some cases set their own clients up, has come and gone, and police have spent a lot of money, although it's worth noting that no police officer has been charged and none seem to have lost their jobs as a result of the Lawyer X scandal. You know, there are many honest, hardworking and ethical investigators on this case, no doubt, as we speak. So they'll be employing all the weapons they can draw on, and that will be forensics. The black Audi that was used as the getaway car wasn't totally burnt, so there may well be a motherload of DNA evidence that points to who was in that car, and then who might have been the driver, who might have been the gunman. So I think they'll do this investigation thoroughly. They need to do it quickly, and they need to find the culprits.
Damon Johnston is the Victorian editor of The Australian.